You're listening to the Love Your Neighbor podcast.
Welcome to the Links podcast. I'm Becky Blue, and I am a guest host today. We love having John behind the microphone, but he's been gracious enough to invite me to host today. I got to be with him a few months ago to talk about my book, which is Turning the Magic and Mystery of More Days, and we just found that we like to talk. So we hope that you like to listen. And today, as my guest, I have one of my favorite people from Brandon. And I think I talked last time at the podcast about it's good to have a friend from every decade. So when I think about this woman, she would be one of my top 3 or 4. Can I tell your decade, Laura?
You can.
In the 40s. She's in the 40s, and I'm in the my age is 63. So I celebrated her 40th birthday with her not too long ago, and just really blessed by having her in my life. We collaborate through the wonderful nonprofit Brandon Tennis Association. So we're going to talk a little bit of tennis, but a little bit of just life in general, and I know you'll glean some real wisdom from Laura. So our guest today is Laura Wong. And hi,
hello.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
How do you like to introduce yourself, Laura?
Well, I'm Laura Wong. My last name's a lot easier now that I'm married into a 4-letter versus 11-letter last name. So
what was your maiden name?
Klinkhammer.
Oh, so that's fun though. Klinkhammer?
It is. Yes.
Okay.
Very German. I guess I grew up in Mitchell and lived in Brandon now for 6, going on close to 7 years. We moved when our oldest was a baby. And my husband Curtis and I have really enjoyed Brandon. And
talk a little bit more about that. Because you probably could have chosen several places to live.
Well, yes. Curtis grew up in Sioux Falls. I'm from Mitchell originally. And I'm a small town girl at heart. Mm-hmm. So Sioux Falls obviously is not Chicago. It's not Los Angeles. But for me, I knew when we got married and I told Curtis this, I said, I just want to live in a, similar to my hometown, a little bit smaller, close-knit community. And he at first was, let's, Sioux Falls, let's live here. Well, we looked at a house in Brandon and then we looked in Sioux Falls. Long story short, we ended up in Brandon several years later. So it was more of a calling than it was anything else. I, at the time, told him, I said, I don't even know why. I said, I just feel a pull. So I think it was a higher being.
And I sense from you, from what I know, that calling piece is important to you.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I guess I've been an occupational therapist for the last 15 years, and our identities change in the different seasons of life that we have, and becoming a mother of 3. Whew, feels like 5 some days, but a mother of 3 in the last couple of years really kind of changed my identity. Still a child of God, first and foremost, but I struggled a little more to get back into the workforce, and I just realized that, maybe I'm pushing too hard, and maybe I need to step back and open my hands up to new possibilities. And enter Becky in a conversation we'd had about just becoming more involved in the Brandon Tennis Association. And here we are talking today about it and how we can make tennis an even greater part of maybe someone else's story, not just tennis, but just connecting with others. And
yeah, talk a little bit about how you were kind of a career woman, right? Occupational therapy.
Yes.
And then sort of making that shift to be maybe a little more stay at home. And yes. I think that's hard for women of your age.
Very hard. In fact, that's part of my notes was I know Stacey Omlin talked about this. I had listened to her podcast a little while back. And just that identity, I won't say crisis, but just an identity shift. And knowing that it's okay to let go of something, even if you've gone to school for 6.5+ years and spent a lot of time, a lot of your energy in this path. It's a season in your life right now. And I can see myself returning to that in a more full, maybe a part-time capacity down the road. But as of right now, this is my calling of where I feel I need to be, have a more flexible schedule to allow to be at home more and be more involved in my kids' life and still feel connected to the community. So it's been a good godsend to have you approach and just have these conversations with you. So.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I've been kind of scoping out Laura Wong for years related to my own desire to hand off my leadership at the Brandon Tennis Association. And, Laura was kind of one of the only people who would just show up at a tennis match, and she didn't have children in the match. She came to watch. So I knew she had some enthusiasm and some love of the game. So for those of you who might not know, Laura is now our first executive director of the Brandon Tennis Association. And so it's been wonderful watching her grow into that position over the past year. So Laura, talk about moving into the nonprofit, almost kind of volunteer world. How has that helped your identity when you did leave your profession behind?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a big shift, and honestly, I find it even more, if it was possible. I found a lot of fulfillment in my OT career, but just it's filling a void. Being involved in something you're really passionate about really is kind of a game changer, and it really gives you that motivation and drive to, okay, this is why I'm getting up today. This is my go-to. This is my calling at this time. So just embracing that and learning that it's okay that, hey, now might not be the time for that sector of, the 9 to 5 or whatever, but having the nonprofit behind it, it gives you that, like I said, that passion behind something that tennis has brought so much joy to my life in a lot of ways. You know this, but that's how I met my husband, Curtis.
Very nice. Yeah.
So, it was a mutual friend that introduced us, and it was something that we shared in common, and just started off as friends, and here we are 3 kids later. So
that's so great.
Yeah.
So what would you say to somebody in Brandon who's like, oh, I've always kind of wanted to play tennis, or I played tennis like in 8th grade and I haven't picked up a racket. Yes. Any thoughts on that?
Give it a try. You never know till you try, and it doesn't matter how good you are because you're getting exercise regardless. And,
right.
And it's such a fun sport that really any level, any age, that's the part I like the most, is that you can have a preschooler out there. You can have heck, we bring our toddler, out there, and she's running around and just picking up balls, whatever. And then having adults that have never played. That's where my passion is too, is getting adults out there that maybe have never tried it, and just there's so much more to the game itself. It's the relationships you build, and that's what brings me a lot of joy, is connecting people in the community. So
yeah, thank you. And I think the intergenerational aspect of it is really wonderful. And I love what you did last year with, a lot of you probably heard of Lynxville Camp. You might have friends or neighbors who take their kids. Maybe talk a little bit about the Lynxville Camp and then the opportunities for parents while they're at the camp.
Yeah. So Lynxville Camp is nothing new. You had started that back many years ago, but it's basically a 4-week, it goes throughout the summer, but we have opportunities that we're trying to get. We have basically kids lessons going on, and then we're trying to incorporate adult lessons at the same time. Just again, to get parents more involved. It's so easy, and I'm guilty of it, to just, hey kids, watch TV here for a while, but it's such a good activity to get out of the house and get your kids out there, and you can just be tossing the ball. You can do anything. I mean, it's just really just being involved with them. And we look to expand our adult programming even more too, of just offering beginner lessons, intermediate, or just recreational, anything. And then also there's competitive leagues, of course. There's some in Sioux Falls, but we're trying to build that up more in Brandon as well.
So what's the time frame like for sign up or those kinds of things?
Yes. So we will have our information out in the Park and Rec brochure that's coming up very soon. And the timeline we'll have is basically lessons start in June, but we have the prep and sign up in April. And our Facebook page is where we do most of our updating of information. And we also have our website, and that's where parents can go to sign up their kids for that summer Lynxville camp. So, yeah, it's
visit the website or the Facebook page for Brandon Tennis Association.
Yes.
I'm going to shift gears and ask for a little free advice to our young parents out there. You are an occupational therapist and work with children a lot. So what are your best parenting tips related to occupational therapy?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest one is get your kids moving. It's how our brains thrive is through movement and the sensory aspect of, I've worked with a lot of kids that have had sensory processing issues and ADHD and kids on the spectrum. I mean, it's something that movement is not unique to anyone. Movement is movement, and it's so good for your brain development. So of course, I feel like a little bit of my calling too is kind of getting those youngsters in it at an earlier age. That preschool age, preschool kindergarten, I really like, just because not only do I have my own, but it's an age group I've worked a lot with, and knowing how crucial it is for them to be developing their sensory motor systems and how it all works together. And tennis is really the perfect avenue to help move that in the right direction. So really it's funny because I would say a few years back, I just had one of those moments thinking, how can I combine kind of my OT, my tennis, my love for tennis, and love for working with kids? How can I combine all three of those and enter this position? I think that I found that. So.
Yeah, that's perfect. And we hope you stay for a long time.
Yes.
It's so good. What about you for self-care? What do you like to do?
That's a good one. Self-care, I would say the tennis is definitely one of them, obviously. That's a big one. But just taking time for yourself to get away from the noise. We have a busy house. So just taking time to go for walks outside and connect with nature. I like to read. Usually I'm kind of a read by mood. I think we've talked about that.
Have a stack of books on your nightstand.
Stack
what
of
are you
books.
in the mood for?
What do I feel like tonight? And so honestly, it's just taking that time for yourself to know what your limits are. And I'm a go person. Anyone that knows me, I am generally pretty high energy. And if I'm not, then, I need to find those moments to take care of myself again. So we all need that time away. And thank goodness I have a great husband too that allows for that time, so we can both kind of navigate that with, a growing family and stuff. So,
So this is the Love Your Neighbor podcast. Give an example of how you love your neighbor in Brandon.
Yeah. For me, one of the biggest areas that comes to mind is just being there for someone, especially in a very challenging time. Being in the OT realm, I've dealt with some situations with people that are pretty tough. They're end of life things, things that I've worked with. So I think sometimes it comes a little easier for me to step in when things are really challenging for some, which may not be the case for a lot of people. And so anyway, it's just being there. I mean, just as someone to talk to, if they're willing to talk, and if they don't, just physically being there for someone at a tough time in their life. So
I love that. Do you have any leading questions that you ask people so you can kind of go deep with them instead of just the chit chat?
I try to keep, I know I can kind of sense, I'm a pretty intuitive person, so I can kind of sense if someone doesn't want, to go any deeper on a certain topic or whatever, but just, hey, how are you doing? Just focusing on them and not as much the situation, but what are you doing to help care for yourself? And just taking time to know their support.
Yeah, that would be a great question for everybody. What are you doing to take care of yourself?
Yeah.
So thanks, everybody. Thank you, Laura, and thanks to our listeners. And please share this podcast. We love Brandon, and we want other people who love Brandon to listen or to learn about us. So take care.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Love Your Neighbor podcast. The purpose of the Love Your Neighbor podcast is to build community one conversation at a time. You can help us build that community by sharing the podcast on your social media channels and rating our podcast on whatever platform you're listening from. Another way is to let us know of any neighbors who have a story. Go Leaks!